all here. This is wonderful. All right. Welcome, hello. Welcome to another pulse-pounding, edge of your seat, extra hyphenated House of No here at the Flying Fox. We are the third Sunday of every month. We've been doing this for, I don't know, 3.5 years, something like that, of all strange and unusual content. And we're very happy to have you here. We're very happy to have Irving Finkel here. This is all quite exciting. For those of you who don't know, the entire event tonight is a double feature live lecture series, a mostly ghostly edition, because Christmas from the British tradition is one aspect of that is like telling ghost stories around Christmas. And personally, I am not a Christmas fan, so I'm leaning heavy into the supernatural and the ghosts for the window of time, and it makes me happy. So I hope it makes you happy in turn. All right, so let's have a brief conversation about the entirety of the human species' story. Everyone sitting down, good, because we may be here for the rest of your lives. Hello, Irving. Shall I call you Mr., Dr., Irv, friend? What do you prefer?
I really don't mind. You seem to be swimming in mauve blancmange. Is that correct?
In what?
Your background is a kind of misty, wishy-washy mauve, everything out of focus, as if you're on another planet. I assume you are on another planet. Is that correct?
Definitely out of this world, yes.
Yes, well, it shows. Okay, well, you can call me Irving. That's my name, so I think that's probably a good idea.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so a bit of background here on Irving Finkel, born in North London, not too far off from the Alexandra Palace, which was the site of the first science fiction television broadcast in 1935 of R.U.R. Rossum's Universal Robots, written by Carl Capek, and the nearby Fishmonger Arms, site of the first London gig for Crazy Cabin and the Rhythm Rockers in 1971. That's for you, Mike. Dr. Finkel received his PhD in Assyriology with a dissertation on Babylonian exorcistic spells against demons from the University of Birmingham, home of both Black Sabbath and the mighty GBH. I know, ridiculous, right? I'm pairing all the things I love together. So thanks for sticking with. Dr. Finkel is the assistant keeper of ancient Mesopotamian script, languages, and cultures in the Department of the Middle East in the British Museum, where he specializes in cuneiform inscriptions on tablets of clay from ancient Mesopotamia. He is the author of a whole series of work, including but not limited to the books The Ark Before Noah and The First Ghosts, which here's The First Ghosts right here, if you want to take a look at it later. He's beaming in live from the greatest of Britons, where I presume it is either currently raining or shall be shortly. So, Irving, I feel like you talk a lot about other people, countless quantities that have lived, loved, and died over millennia. So let's flip the focus for a moment, and please, Mr. Finkel, I know I gave you a brief bio of your work, but please tell us more about yourself. What led you to live the life you lead, and are you happy?
Well, the truth of the matter is I've had rather a strange life, because I decided when I was quite young I wanted to work in the British Museum, which is a difficult thing to do, but I was lucky and succeeded. But also, I was interested in reading difficult writing, ancient writing, sometimes extinct things that people had deciphered, so that you could read messages that have come down from several thousand years ago and find out about life in very ancient times. That seems to me a very absorbing and fascinating thing. So in the British Museum, we have a big collection of these inscriptions from ancient Mesopotamia, which is today what we call Iraq. And the ancient populations of that part of the world wrote messages on pieces of clay. That was their writing system. They didn't use paper like we do, but they wrote on clay. And the clay survives in the ground. And when archaeologists excavate, they sometimes find many thousand pieces of clay with writing on. And once it was deciphered, which was a long time ago now, It means that we can read these messages. They're like email messages that come out of the ether from remote times, and we can find out what people thought and what they believed and how they behaved. It's really very fascinating.
So what's the best thing that that happens to you in your day-to-day?
Waking up and finding that I'm still alive.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So have you seen the film or a stage production of The Sound of Music?
No.
So there's a line in one of the songs. Let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. And I think I'd like to start. I like to start narratives at the very beginning. For instance, museum exhibits or art galleries should be organized chronologically so that you can track the evolution as time progresses.
Yes, that is one theory. It's not the only way of doing things, but it's one theory.
Takes all kinds. So therefore, genetically speaking, how far back in time does humanity's story start? If we can go back in time and meet our ancestors by way of a TARDIS or flying DeLorean, plug in a destination year and step out to see the very beginning of our story, what year would that be, and what would that experience be like for us?
Well, just a moment. If you're talking about history, if you are talking about history, you cannot have history without writing. And the first writing comes into existence in about 3,500 BC. Okay, so before we have writing is what we call prehistory. And human beings have existed for many hundreds of thousands of years before writing. It goes back a long, long, long way. Homo sapiens. This is a different matter. It's to do with things in the ground, of course, but skeletons of early man and earlier man and Neanderthals and all that stuff. That is the remote chronological thing going backwards for many, many thousands of years. That's a different matter. But when we have the beginnings of writing, then we get messages from people. And the minute we do that, we find out that the people who lived say 5,000 years ago or 5,500 years ago are like we are. They're not some bizarre species who've half evolved, or they're not intelligent, or they walk around making funny noises, but they are people like people today, which means they are complicated. It means they are animals underneath. It means they can believe things which are mutually contradictory, and they can behave morally and immorally. Everything that you can attribute to a modern human being goes back to the earliest stages that we can find out what these people were like then. It's an important matter. They're not like shadows or half persons or something like that. They're the sort of person, if you met a Babylonian on the bus, for example, if you still have buses in New York, if you sat next to a Babylonian, then you probably after a while would be able to have some kind of simple conversation, waving your hands about and making funny noises. But the thing is, it's an important matter that all the people in the world, if you have a detached view, if you don't take any notice of religion and clothing and food and the stupid things that politicians say, but if you just look at the whole species, we are one species, and we always have been one species, and that is the significant thing. And when you have writing for the first time, then you can see that this is true.
So, so this talk was billed as a discussion about your book, The First Ghosts, Ancient Mesopotamian Ghost Stories, but really they are the first ghost stories that we know of. So if we can go possibly further back and talk about ancient peoples who have silently disappeared from the archaeological record. No note, no conversation, no goodbye. One could say they have in fact ghosted us.
Well, you can.
So like some examples being Peru's Norte Chico civilization, the Indus Valley civilization in India, Göbekli Tepe, or the Karahan Tepe sites in Turkey.
Yes,
presumably plenty more. What are you most excited or frustrated by in regards to these elusive lost peoples?
Well, human beings always died, did they not?
Pretty sure.
All human beings die, and usually they are buried in the ground because otherwise they stink and they're full of disease. So from the beginning of the species, people have buried their dead. And from quite early in the archaeological record, when they bury their dead, they sometimes put things in the grave with the person. Even the Neanderthals did this. So they give them something, beads or a little bit of apparatus or something they might need. And the idea is that they thought that some element of a human being survived the demise of the body. And this can be traced back already to the Neanderthals, that when you buried the stinking mass, some part of that element came out and went somewhere. And it seems to me that if that is true, if some invisible part of a person leaving the body after death goes somewhere, then it can also come back. And if it comes back, then you have the construction of ghosts in the world.
Okay, so slightly switching gears here for a moment, though. Understanding that the evidence might be slim pickings, can you speak about the idea that women in the Indus Valley civilization were in positions of prominence, if not even leadership roles within their society? Is this more wishful thinking and projection from a modern perspective, wanting to find this evidence? But if it is accurate, are there any thoughts as to why this was such a rarity in the otherwise often male-dominated ancient world?
That proposal and that subject matter and that extremely difficult to follow question has nothing to do with the topic which you have made me stay up very late in London to talk to you about, which is ghosts. And as anything to do with the role of women in antiquity, I utterly refuse to discuss that because it is provocative and there is no evidence whatsoever for an intelligent person to consider.
That's an answer. All right. I guess so. All right. Moving right along.
Let's move right along. If you want to talk about ghosts in antiquity, this is an interesting thing because people all over the world today, parts of all populations believe in ghosts. Many people see them. Many people think they've seen them. Some people don't believe in them, and some people think people who talk about them are stupid. But it's a universal matter among human beings that they have an idea that the dead come back, that sometimes you can see them and that people have seen them. And this is a universal matter. And people who know about this, they know it from lies, which you see on television, and fiction, which you see in the movies. And nobody ever does any serious reading. But when you investigate, you discover that in the Middle Ages, it was a common idea. And the Greeks and the Romans and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and all the people that we can follow backwards all believed in ghosts, and they all had the same basic idea, which is this: that when someone is buried, if they died under difficult circumstances or painful or in childbirth or in a fire or some disaster, then their spirit that left the body would never rest in peace wherever it was supposed to be. It would always be restless. And often it's those unsatisfied and troubled individuals who come back, and they appear to people, and sometimes they tease them, and sometimes they are nice to them, and sometimes they're horrible and make them sick. But the mechanism, the understanding that a bad finish for a human being means that the story is not concluded, there's no end to it, that the spirit comes and it pulls your hair and it makes trouble. Then this is all over the world, the same basic idea. It's quite remarkable. And the thing about it is that the book I wrote about the Babylonian, the Mesopotamian evidence, the interest of it is it's the first that we can see. It's the oldest evidence that you can read an inscription that talks about a ghost and how to get rid of a ghost and why the ghost is there and why is it cross with us and how to bring up a ghost from the dead to answer a question. All those things are written on these ancient documents. So it's not made up by me, and it's not written with a kind of an angle to persuade people. This is real testimony from very ancient times. So it's a fascinating book. I think everybody should buy 3 copies. You keep one in the toilet, one in the car for when there's a lot of traffic, and one by the bed. And you'll find that it's a very great source of comfort to many people who are otherwise troubled with insomnia and other such difficulties.
Excellent. If we can just slightly, I'd like to just back up as to be able to define. So we're talking about Sumerians,
Yes.
but I'd like to know exactly what does that mean. Whether that means Sumerians, Akkadians, black-headed people. Like what are we talking about when we say Sumeria?
Okay. Well, the landscape in which this all takes place is what we call today Iraq. That the Greeks called it Mesopotamia, right? Ancient Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia means between the rivers in Greek. And the rivers are the Euphrates and the Tigris. So the territory between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, there are successive populations. So the oldest one we know are the Sumerians, as you say. And then came along the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And then after that, the Persians and the Greeks and Arab speakers and the modern world. There's a whole long continuum of stuff. But the ancient population are either Sumerians or Babylonians, and they live together simultaneously, and they use this funny cuneiform writing. Both sets of people use the same writing system.
Okay, so where did these people, be it Sumerians, Akkadians, black-headed people, or whoever they were, actually come from? Is it too simplistic to think hunter-gatherer explorers types left Africa at least 50,000 years ago and then eventually decided to literally set up camp between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and never leave?
Well, ultimately, that's what happened, but not in a tight chronological sense, because the populations of the Middle East and Africa Middle East and Europe came out of Africa. But that's a whole different kettle of fish. It's very, very, very ancient times. And what we're talking about is a period of time which is not really very long ago. 5,000 years ago is not all that long ago. And the first population that we can see in Iraq are these people called Sumerians who speak the language Sumerian. And the reason that they went there is because the rivers gave such fertility that the land was irrigated naturally and all sorts of stuff grew very readily. But they're nothing to do with people who came out of Africa in the way you were suggesting.
So how far back in time is ancient Sumeria? I don't mean in years. Rather, we're here today because our relatives were there back then, maybe not in Sumeria, but existing on the planet. How many generations of relatives would it take to get to when the ziggurats were being built in Ur?
Well, let's think, if you have a grandfather, a father, and a son in the family, it's about 100 years, right? Something like that. So if you imagine a cinema queue with lots and lots of people waiting to see Bob Dylan, grandfathers, fathers, and sons, each one is 100 years. So you can imagine how long 5,000 people will take in a queue. It probably will be about the same length as a queue to see Bob Dylan. It's not very long in terms of the history of the world. It's nothing at all, 5,000 years. After all, most people live the better part of a century. And when you're a 2-year-old or you're stupid, you think that 100 years, oh, you can't imagine 100 years. But when you get near 100 years, then you suddenly realize what a short period of time it is after all.
Right. So it's a relatively small music venue, as you mentioned, worth of people, really. And so all those people are now possibly silently existing alongside of us, sight unseen. What were ancient Mesopotamians' opinions on what happens to us when we die, and are they with us right now?
Well, what they thought was that, for one thing, this is a really important thing. They didn't have hell in ancient Mesopotamia. They didn't have that stupid idea invented later that people suffered after death for the naughty things they did during their lives. This was a great disaster for the human race that anybody thought of it. So what happened is when you died, you were buried, and the essence of you went down into the underworld where you hung about waiting. You hung about. And that's how it's described what it's like. It's rather gloomy and rather dusty. And there were lots and lots of these spirits hanging around. And it was a bit like people waiting in a railway station for a train when there's been a train strike, something like that. And we don't really know what they thought about it. But that is their basic official belief. But we know from lots of graves that people were buried with lots of expensive and important things. So they really thought that they were going to be needing all those things in their lives to come. And you know what I said before, that human beings can believe things which are mutually contradictory. So you have in this situation a literary idea of a hell, of an underworld where you go. And then at the same time, when your grandfather died, he was buried in the courtyard of your house, and they had a special kind of pipe, and you could pour every day or every few days food and drink down the pipe for the grandfather who would need it. So they believed on the one hand that there really was a hungry grandfather in the ground, and then they believed in the underworld, and then they believed in everything. It's like all these issues with human beings, because nobody knows. And so you have these constructions that suit a society in which people live, and sometimes they're very fanciful and daft, and sometimes they're kind of practical, and sometimes they're both at once. That's the situation. And it applies to these very ancient people, but it also applies to people nowadays, because they believe that people believe that they go up to heaven and flow around in heaven, and people who don't believe that think they're insane for believing such a childish idea, and all this kind of stuff. So it's very complicated, but the real thing is that the human species, they live in the planet, they have to deal with disease and trouble and infant mortality and food and water, and they all face the same basic problems. And actually, the problem about death, nobody has ever known. Nobody really knows. So there are these constructions to make the whole matter kind of acceptable in some level. That's what it has to be. Otherwise, it drives you mad at the concept you disappear and there's nothing of you and you're all gone. Nobody likes that idea at all.
So the Mesopotamian idea of a limbo is not the Jewish.
No, it's nothing to do with limbo.
Not the Sheol situation.
No, it's nothing to do with limbo, because the thing about limbo is you're waiting for a verdict. Actually, they've abolished limbo, the Catholic Church, I believe. They made a proclamation, there is no more limbo. It's rather a remarkable achievement. So anyway, the thing is this, that what did you want to ask me about, really? I mean, do you want to know more about what this book is about and what it's for, or why people should buy lots of copies or just one copy, tell their relatives? I mean, it's not too late, for example, for everybody you know to give one copy to all of their friends for Christmas. What an admirable scheme.
I just gave a copy of not this book, but the Ark Before Noah to my brother-in-law, actually. So I agree. This is a highly giftable series of books you put out.
That's a very impressive move on your part. All I can say is how grateful and appreciative I am.
I tried. Thank you. So I have a question for you in regards to religious belief versus mythology versus entertainment. The Epic of Gilgamesh, collecting some items that are a work of fiction versus what's connected directly to these people's religion. Did ancient people think that Enkidu was fiction, but believe that Inanna was real?
No, I don't think it's like that. I think this is how I believe it worked. In ancient times, they believed in a lot of gods and a lot of goddesses. Okay, not just one, but they had big and small and fat and thin, lots of gods and lots of goddesses. And they knew theologically a lot about them and their relations. And there were also stories about them. And the stories about them came about in order to explain why things are like they are, how nature is and how life is and all that, and other things like heroism and stuff. They're kind of stories which grew out of their universe with all these deities to make things clear to people. So it's all really one stuff. It's not that one is they believed and one they disbelieved. It was all part of their inheritance. And I think on the whole, most people believed in their gods, like most people used to believe in God today. I don't know if they do anymore.
So if there's thousands of years between when the Sumerians are worshiping Inanna
Yes.
to the Babylonians worshiping Ishtar, did the Babylonians realize that it was the same deity with a different?
Yes, it wasn't thousands of years. It was much less time there, a few hundred years. But certainly, they knew that Inanna, the Sumerian goddess Inanna, who was goddess of love and war, and there are pictures of her on sea. She was very beautiful. She was the best quality kind of goddess. They knew that Ishtar, the Akkadian, was her equivalent. They literally knew that they were one and the same. They identified them. And we know this because of a funny matter. When there were so many gods and goddesses in this culture, Sumerian and Babylonian gods and goddesses, there were temples all over the country for the big ones and the little ones. There were lots and lots of deities. And after a while, an important person in the kingdom decided we have to sort this out. So they made a system that all the big gods had a court. Okay, each one had a court, and in the court there were all the people they needed, like someone to look after the children, and someone to polish the silver, and someone to look after the horses. So all the small gods were put into the palaces of the big gods, and they were sorted out, which means that they had a kind of system where they all worked together. It's very remarkable, I think, very remarkable. But also they thought their gods could be naughty, and they could be adulterous, and they could betray people. So they didn't have a kind of awe-inspiring fear of the gods and goddesses, because they knew that they behaved like human beings because they were made up by human beings. Like adultery, things like that. Eating too much. Not paying on the buses, those sorts of things.
Although it's possible our buses will be free, you never know.
Yeah, pigs might fly.
All right, so going back on topic here, do you believe in ghosts?
I tell you what I do. I've never seen one. And this makes it very difficult to have an opinion. But the thing is, I've read so much about it, and I know so many people who say they've seen a ghost, so I have no reason to disbelieve them, that I think that people do see ghosts, and I have never seen a ghost. So it's not a matter of belief or otherwise, like a matter of faith or something. It's a matter of experience. I'm always hoping that I will see a ghost for myself, but so far not.
So I've definitely experienced some sort of supernatural experience. And the moment I did experience it, I was overjoyed just with the simple thought of, well, this validates and confirms that we don't just rot in a box and that, this is all there is. And I was very excited about it. And then as it continued, it turned out to get more impactful and start moving things around the house. And I was very, I needed to leave that place right away. So I regret it in hindsight, but at the time, very eye-opening.
Did you see the ghost?
I felt the ghost. It moved the bed around and various other odd phenomena. Yeah. As soon as I experienced it, I knew exactly that it was not of this world, in my opinion. Well, it got more extreme as it went, and then I ran for the hills.
Well, you're a fortunate man. You see, you could become a scientist of the matter, because if you have experience, it gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, I suppose. So do you think the belief in ghosts predates religions?
Yes, I do. Definitely.
Okay. And how are ancient ghost stories different than what we might expect today?
Well, we don't have any really ancient ghost stories. We don't have stories like if you buy something in a bookshop and you go in a hotel and there's a funny noise in the corridor and there's a clanking noise of chains and people go woo woo. That's all invented by Hollywood or Dickens and everything after Dickens. So everybody knows what ghosts are supposed to be like, but actually that's nothing to do with what we know of proper proper consideration of the idea. It's not clanking chains.
So if it isn't, then what is it instead?
Well, if you read the book, that I wrote, what happens is people see ghosts. They see them in their houses, and they're very frightened, and they have to get a professional exorcist to come to the property and drive them away. Because if you don't drive them away, they make a lot of trouble. And some ghosts, if they're mean, nasty, horrible, and ugly type ghosts, when people are asleep, they go in their ear, because you can't cover both your ears when you are asleep. And when they go in the ear, they go inside them and they go in their mind and they drive them crazy. So the most dangerous ghosts are very dangerous. And the exorcists, the professionals, they had their methods for forcing them out, forcing them to go away by calling upon the most powerful gods and very powerful incantations. You know something? If the Babylonians did this thing which we call necromancy. You know what necromancy means?
I have a version of it, but please tell us what you know.
A man holding a microphone should be able to define necromancy on the spot. In point of fact, it's the process when you call up someone from the dead to tell you the future that you need to know. This is a very common matter, but in Babylonia, they had a good way of doing it, because they would get a skull where there was no skin left on it, just the bare skull out of a grave, and they would put it on the table, and they would anoint this skull with one of those mixtures with bits and pieces in oil, like in Macbeth, like the witches in Macbeth. And when they were all ready, then the exorcist, who'd probably be dressed in all sorts of impressive things, would call upon the sun god to bring up the spirit of the dead person to go into the skull to answer questions. And the idea was you would ask the skull the question and it would go and answer you the information that you wanted to know. And they did this in Mesopotamia, and so did the Greeks, and so did the Romans, and so in the Babylonian Talmud did the Jews in the Middle Ages. They all did this, that they used a skull as a medium for communication, and they had their own local magic to force the ghost into the skull to be interrogated, and then to force the ghost out of the skull and go back where it belongs, because they didn't want the ghost hanging around in the house ever after. So you had to be powerful enough to bring it here and send it away. And they used a skull as the medium. So you can imagine, perhaps, if you had a very pressing and important question and you paid somebody to do this ritual in your house in the middle of the night, and they do this with great ceremony and the skull is there and everybody's waiting and waiting and waiting, and all of a sudden the teeth rattle or something, you'd have a heart attack in fright, because it's not something you can just casually do, like going to the newsagents. It must have been a big build-up. Probably you had to pay quite a lot of silver bits to the person to do it, and then wait and wait. And then if something happened, it would be incredibly intimidating and stuff like that. So be careful. If you're going to try it at home, be very careful.
A good word of warning. Can you tell us about the finite nature of souls from ancient Mesopotamia?
No, I don't think they did have a finite nature of souls. I think it's the other way around. I think they had an idea that there was a finite. Did you say finite or infinite? Finite.
Finite.
Yes, finite. You're quite right. Sorry. They had a finite amount. This is something I tried to write about in this book. It's rather an interesting idea. That it works like this, that the life force which produces human beings is like water in the world. It's like you have water, but it's a finite amount of water, and you have to be careful of it. And they thought that the force that made humans alive was finite in this respect, that the ghosts of the spirits of the people who are waiting in the underworld, waiting for what was going to happen, what they were waiting for is this, that for a new baby to be born in society, a new infant to come into the world, somebody had to die. there was a balance in the world, so that when a person died, the life force was thereby liberated, and it was used to create a new person. So it means that they did think it was a finite matter, and there was a balance, so that one equated the other. This is a very seductive and important idea if you happen to be the sort of person who goes to see people dying of cancer in a hospital with only 4 days to live, which is not a pleasant thing. And if they had the idea in their minds that by dying themselves and giving up the life force, that somewhere else in the same country or another country, one of these things will come out and a new baby would come, this is a rather marvelous and poetic idea. If I was a clergyman, I would comfort the sick with this idea that by surrendering your life, which is virtually finished, you then enable a new, fresh life to come into existence.
Can we talk about the Ark before Noah?
Sure.
I would love
another book with which no household is complete. I mean, it's an essential reading. I couldn't put it down when I read it. I just thought it was marvelous, a bargain.
Excellent. But can you give us some background here on whether we're talking about the cuneiform texts that you received some not 20 years ago, but give or take, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Please let's hear all about this, as well as I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the Ugaritic texts that were found in the 1920s, but all of this sheds really fascinating light on.
It's true.
All of this.
Well, to cut a long story short, somebody came into the museum with one of these ancient tablets, which they sometimes bring for us to read. And this one was part of the flood story, which we knew from Mesopotamia. It's already in the Gilgamesh epic that you just mentioned before. And in this tablet, there was a description of the fact there was going to be a flood and that everything would be destroyed, and that one person had been picked out to build an ark, to build a boat in which you could have one male and one female of all the species to get into the boat when the waters came, so they would be safe when the waters went down. This is the story which ended up as in the book of Genesis about Noah. It's the same basic narrative. And the thing about this tablet was it was written in about 1800 BC, which is at least a millennium before the Bible was written, at least a millennium meaning a period of 1,000 years, from the Latin millennium meaning millennium. And so this is what happened. This tablet came in with this story. And something interesting happened about it in particular, because when the gods told mankind to build this ark, they gave them all the building instructions, the size, the dimensions, the materials, and the shape. And that is what's so remarkable, because the information made it possible for us to make a modern boat of the same pattern using the ancient dimensions. And it was a round boat called a coracle, which was what was discovered, what was recommended by the gods, because these round coracles, which exist in many parts of the world, are made of simple materials and covered with waterproofing, but when they're in the water, they never sink. And this is a great advantage if you're building a lifeboat with all the forms of male and female life in it until it was safe to come out, that you want a boat that's not going to sink, and that's why they use the coracle. So it's all about that. It's a very good and exciting story.
So these details, though, contradict what's in the Bible. What was the response to this from the world, really? Is this sacrilegious? How was this received?
Well, and this is a very interesting question, because it hinges on the primacy of the narrative. So, of course, when the Hebrew text came, the Hebrew Bible became familiar to the world, and then its translation into Latin and other languages, Arabic, and so forth and so forth. When the story was first known to us, it came from the Bible, and it's confusing and complex to discuss the origins of the biblical text. But whatever happened, it was not it was much later than the Babylonian version, which I was alluding to before, which is about 1800 BC. That's a long time ago. So you have this primary Babylonian narrative, and there are many details in the primary Babylonian narrative which appear in the Hebrew narrative in the book of Genesis. And one of the most important things is that when the arks came to land, in both cases, a bird was released, and the bird came back, and then the bird was released again, and it came back, and the third time it didn't. So that the Noah in his ark and the Babylonian equivalent of Noah in his ark knew that there was trees above the water level and that it was safe to come out of the boat. The same test is applied in the very old story and in the Bible. So this proves, unless someone is insanely unimaginative and rigid in religious prejudice, that the Hebrew text as we know it derives from an earlier source. So this does cause trouble in certain parts of the world. For example, in the southern states of America, I had some remarkably firmly written emails by bishops who thought I should be tarred and feathered for producing a work of this kind, which they thought undermined the text of the Bible or pinched the story written by God, or I don't know what it was. But I don't care a fig for people whose opinions are based on religious fanaticism, because they are the most primitive types of humans, and there is no point in arguing with them. But the actual intellectual matter is clear, that the biblical text derives from the earlier one, and there were changes in between in the measurements and the details. That's not surprising that there were changes in between, but the basic narrative is certainly come into the world from the Babylonian sources. So I didn't get tarred and feathered or excommunicated. And actually, I tell you something, if you are Jewish like me, the threat of excommunication doesn't matter a fig.
Yeah. Okay. So I would love to know more about ancient Canaanite religion, culture. Asherah is a fascinating element, Baal, and the
yeah, what you're asking is you're asking for a 3-year university course in one conversation, isn't it? That seems to be the basic principle. Is this what you usually do to your guests? Put them through this kind of third degree?
I thought this was going to be a tough interview, but not the way it turned out.
No. People often say that to me, but let me ask you a question. Has one of your guests ever come back for a second episode?
Actually, yes. I'll have you know, I've got people here in the room who have spoke here on multiple occasions. I'm not sure I'm repeating on them, they're repeating on me.
It's a very gratifying sign. I'm very proud of you.
Okay, so tell me about let's see. Here's one. So not ghosts, but real life ghouls and monsters.
I don't know about that stuff. That's for children, man. I'm not interested in all that. Most of it is created by Hollywood, or by frauds, or by people who want to sell books and all that kind of stuff. It's a fact. I mean, lots of people like to be frightened by things, but when things are really frightening, they don't like it at all. It's a kind of, you know what it's like? It's like this. If you have bad toothache, right? If you bite down on the tooth, it makes it hurt more. But when you discover that, you can't stop doing that. It makes it hurt more, but you don't actually pull the tooth out. And that's what those things are like. They're just like a kind of semi feeling thing. In my very humble opinion, let me say.
Okay, well, I was going to ask about Ashurnasirpal II, and if you had any really incredible ancient stories about his reign.
I don't. I can't do all this. I mean, all these things are complicated, and they can also upset lots of people. I mean, the thing is, there are good books about this, and also it's the middle of the night now, and I'm being brave and struggling. Well, it's not quite the middle of the night, but it's actually quite late. I've had a rather stressful couple of days, and I quite like to go to bed. So is there anything really pressing and
Well,
coercive
here's a very good question. Where can people buy your books?
Oh, any good bookshop, you'll have to help them with that. What I would like to say is this, that there's a lot of nonsense talked in the world about museums, and a lot of people say that museums are wicked and that the stuff in them has been stolen and that it should all be given back and the museum should be burned to the ground and all that kind of stuff. This is wrong. This is wrong. And I want to say this once just for a moment, because this is a topic which is whipped up by people who have animus, politicians and journalists, in order to make something which is in fact extremely significant in the world lose its dignity. But in America, the Met and in the museum in Berlin and in Paris, the Louvre and the British Museum, they have a kind of special role in the world, because it means that anybody who actually goes from New York to London can go in there and see all this stuff from all the ages, from all around the world, with no prejudice and no fee and no money and no hypnosis and no brainwashing, but just what they are for the world at large. I think this is an enlightened and important thing. And the Met it's the same way. You know, it's easy to say this and this and this, but actually when you think what they accomplish, and when the children go with their parents for the first time and they say this is so old and this is so beautiful and look at this and look at this, it's marvelous and it's right, it's good. And this is the thing, it's like tarring and feathering. You have people who have tar and they have feather and they wander around looking for someone to tar and feather. And that's what they do to the British Museum. But the British Museum is not a temple of evil. It is a temple of good. Have you ever been in the British Museum?
Absolutely. I was there last time I was in London to go to a psychobilly festival.
There you are.
Yeah.
There you are. You see, exactly. You're a leading exponent of this material yourself.
I turned the corner and there was the Rosetta Stone and my mouth hit the floor.
I wonder what that mouth was doing on the floor. Now I understand. Listen, I think you should collect all your disciples together and bring them to London and come to the museum. And what we'll do is we'll go for a walk around all the galleries together and have a lovely time. How's that?
Irving, don't threaten me with a good time. Sounds lovely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Irving Finkel.
Thank you. It's jolly nice to meet you. All right, be well.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Be well. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
All right, we did it. Thank you very much, everybody. We have John Deere coming up shortly, who's going to be talking about ghost stories ghost stories for Christmas, M.R. James related BBC productions. Very exciting. But meanwhile, have a drink, have some food. That was great. Thank you. Bye. Tell me you were recording that.